So you sent me a story called "Goodbye, Benjamin" this week, as where we to prepare for the podcast went through it. It's a microfiction 100-word story.
Yeah.
Set the scene for what happened. Can you still tell
Yeah.
the background that led up to the story?
So, as I kind of delineated on before, like this past year, my main focus has been on my novel. But there have been some circumstances that have kind of inspired me to kind of venture outside of that, to take a break. And one of the microfiction stories I wrote was called Goodbye, Benjamin. And it was based on a jarring experience that I encountered this past summer with my neighbor. He wound up committing suicide while I was home. And it was one of those instances that was kind of really caught you in your place, because I do a lot of writing with, the human condition, depression, anxiety. And this man, he was in his early 70s, and I would encounter him every single day while I was working out, and he was very pleasant. He would exchange pleasantries, with me about lifting and like, what's your workout today? Just like the nicest guy I ever met. And this past August, one Friday, I got a knock on my door, and it was about 15 police officers, and they were there to check on a suicide call. And I'm like, no, you've got the wrong place. And they're like, oh, well, we're looking for one, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, that's downstairs. So they, stormed off, went downstairs. And about 5 minutes later, I took my dog out, and I came outside, and there was just this onslaught of police presence. And I saw the wife there that I see every day. And she looked like a deer in the headlights, and she had this indelible sort of expression on her face where her eyes are wide, and it looks like the lights were on, but nobody's home. She was surrounded by police officers. And I approached her, and I just said, hey, like, are you okay? What's going on? And she's like, I don't know. My husband might have hurt himself. And I'm like, is he okay? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm here if you ever need me. I do have a soft spot in my heart for older people, just because my parents are older, and I understand when you get to that certain point in your life, you're not as autonomous, and you do tend to rely on the people around you. And just to see somebody like that was just completely heartbreaking. And you come to find out that her husband wound up committing suicide that day. He was about 72 years old. He was a professional pool player. He couldn't partake in his hobby. He couldn't hold a pool stick anymore. He had colon cancer. He had undergone about 50 sessions of chemotherapy, and you never would have known that from talking to him. He was always lighthearted. He was always just this nice guy, and he would always pull up every day at 5 o'clock while I was working out and just saying like, what's the workout today? Like, what are you doing? And we would always exchange pleasantries, but I never sensed that he was barely holding out. He was just had this convivial sort of attitude where you wanted to talk to him, you wanted to share. And one day he just fucking blows his brains out next door to me. And I had written a microfiction short story about it. And it's tough not to take that stuff to heart, just because I knew him. I saw him every day, and I would always talk to him, whether it was, surface level stuff or he would disclose on his past. But when it happened, I really took it to heart, because, I do deal with anxiety, depression, and I found a way to kind of channel that into productive avenues. But to see somebody that it's overwhelming, and it eventually, you succumb to it. It really kind of strikes a chord with me. So I wrote a short story about it, 100 words, just because I was still working on my novel, and I submitted it to a publisher, and the publisher got back to me and said, "This is beautifully written. We love it, but the ending is not realistic."
Yeah, I wrote down the quote. They said it's, quote, "just not believable."
Yeah.
And then what did you write back?
And like, I read something like that and I'm like, you know what? You're a motherfucker. I'm like, this is verbatim what happened.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not believable. So I just wrote back, listen. And they were like, can you possibly change the ending or the reason why he committed suicide? And I just wrote back, listen, man, I wish I didn't have to even write this story. I wish I could change it all. But I'm like, this is what happened verbatim. So I'm not changing it. And if you don't want it, that's fine. I'll pitch it to other publishers. And their response was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, we'll take it. They doubled the compensation for it. But then they were like, oh, we can't publish it till next year because our magazine is backed up. So I was like, you know what? That's your prerogative, but I'm still going to publish it. I'm still going to pitch it to other magazines. And then before I know it, they respond and they're like, oh, no. We'll take it. We'll swap somebody out and we'll publish it in April. So, and that's sort of a microcosm for what I'm doing with my stories. Like, I am bringing authenticity to these stories. A lot of the stuff you read nowadays, they start out a certain way, but then they're wrapped up in a beautiful bow and they're delivered to you and they make you feel really great and you can go off and make a fucking snow angel outside. And I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to give you the firsthand account of the human experience. And I'm not saying it has to be depressive at all times, but a lot of reality relies in your perspective and how you look at things. And this is one of those stories that is severely dark and it doesn't really have an uplifting end there, but it's a part of life and it happens. And, these suicide ideations will find people that are, susceptible to these sort of ideologies, but it's not something that you should frown upon. It's something that you should explore and to really kind of, look into. A lot of people that have reached out to me over the year about anxiety and depression, they're like, well, how do I make it stop? And what do I do? And it's like, no, you're not getting it. It's not about making it stop. It's about understanding where it's coming from. It's about understanding yourself. And Soren Kierkegaard, who's a Danish philosopher from 300 years ago, he proclaimed that depression and anxiety isn't an ailment. It's more of a spiritual journey. And I think if people can realize that this unsettledness in your chest, this thrownness into the world isn't an ailment, it's more of a call to seek inspiration, to kind of understand yourself and to look inward and not so much outward, not to seek a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a job or a vocation or, a salary, but to see what's internal. And a lot of people are afraid to look inside and see what's really lingering inside. And that's something that I highly recommend you take your time to really explore. And it's something that a lot of people are not prepared to do.
Yeah. With the publication's recommendation to make it more believable, there is a humorous aspect to it where you witness, or not witness, but eventually you weren't actually there, but you learn that your neighbor literally shot himself in the face. That was how he did it, right?
Yep.
And then you write a story about that actual experience, the actual thing that happened, and the magazine emails you back and they're like, I like this story, but I just, there's something about it. Just seems like a little bit made up. Can
melodramatic.
Can we jazz this up a little bit? Can we combine that, but like the ending of Elf where he reunites with his family or something? Like, you know, to me, just, and you emailed them back and you're literally just like, my neighbor blew his head off. This is a real story.
Like,
and
this
they're
is
like, oh,
verbatim what
fuck.
happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm sorry it's not believable for you, but this literally fucking happened.
I'm wondering, like, what is not believable about someone committing suicide?
I don't know.
That literally happens literally every day, hundreds, thousands of times every single day. Someone chooses to end their own life, and the magazine editor's like, I mean, I don't believe someone would actually do that.
I do think that we're in a generation now where suicide is kind of, you know, and mental health is kind of like a cool sort of topic. Like, if you go on Instagram, you'll see people posting about ways to, like, combat your anxiety and depression, and it's kind of saturated with, you know, virtue signaling and, like, look at me, like, I'm sad, but I'm dealing with it. But in all honesty, and I'm not trying to shit on people, but the people that are really suffering from this stuff are not the people that are posting for sympathy.